The morning my husband asked for a divorce, he sprayed cologne. That detail matters. For over 4 decades, Thomas never cared about fragrance. He believed numbers were what mattered, not presentation. He worked in finance, quiet, predictable, disciplined, or at least that's what I believed for 43 years. But that Tuesday morning, he stood in the hallway adjusting his cufflinks, a sharp, unfamiliar scent hanging in the air. "Big presentation?" I asked lightly. "Something like that," he replied without meeting my eyes. That was the first undeniable signal. The truth is, the signs had been stacking for months. Late-night phone calls taken outside, weekend client meetings, receipts from restaurants I had never visited, subtle cash withdrawals that didn't align with our spending patterns. I managed the household accounts for decades. Every grocery bill, every utility payment, every tax file prepared neatly and on time. You don't handle money that long without recognizing irregularities. But I stayed quiet. Why? Because reacting too early gives the other person time to adjust. I wasn't going to accuse without proof. I've run a household for 43 years. Strategy beats emotion. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Thursday evening, I had prepared roasted chicken and vegetables, his favorite comfort meal. He barely touched it. "Evelyn," he began, setting his fork down with careful precision, "we need to discuss something important." His tone wasn't angry. It was rehearsed. "I'm filing for divorce." There it was. No apology, no visible guilt, just execution. He spoke about drifting apart, about wanting independence, about needing to rediscover himself at 71. Then he slid a thick envelope across the table. "I've already spoken to an attorney. I'm trying to make this simple." Simple. He intended to keep the house. The investment accounts, the retirement portfolio, the vacation cabin, the primary vehicle. I could keep my personal jewelry and clothing. 43 years summarized into a relocation package. Everything was legally under his name. Every property deed, every major account. I had never insisted otherwise. We were married. I trusted him. Trust without verification is negligence. I learned that too late. "You should sign quickly," he added calmly. "Dragging this out won't benefit you." That wasn't advice. That was pressure. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at the documents. I calculated survival numbers in my head, Social Security, living expenses, healthcare, inflation. The math was brutal. I had left my teaching career. When we relocated for his promotion decades ago, I raised our children, managed his mother's illness, built our home environment so he could build his career. And legally, I was almost invisible. Fear came first, a cold, tightening feeling in my chest, then humiliation. But beneath both was something stronger, analysis. Thomas was too composed, too organized, too confident that I would fold. Men don't move this efficiently unless they've prepared long in advance. Preparation means planning. Planning means concealment. And concealment usually protects assets. I opened the settlement documents again and studied the numbers more carefully. Transfers had been made over the past year. Gradual, clean, almost unnoticeable, unless you were looking for patterns. He thought I wasn't looking. That was his mistake. The next morning, instead of calling a divorce lawyer, I called someone else, a forensic accountant, because before you fight, you gather leverage. And I had a growing suspicion that this wasn't just about another woman. It was about money. And if I was right, the divorce papers on my table were only the surface of something much darker. 3 days later, I would uncover a hidden company and realize my husband wasn't just leaving me, he was running from something. And I was about to find out what. But what I discovered in those financial records would turn a private betrayal into a public scandal. I didn't hire a divorce lawyer. I hired an investigator. If Thomas wanted to treat our marriage like a business exit strategy, then I would respond like an auditor, not a victim. His name was Victor Liang, mid-50s, precise, unemotional, the kind of man who speaks in bullet points. When I explained the sudden divorce, the asset-heavy settlement in his favor, and the subtle transfers I'd noticed, he didn't react with sympathy. He reacted with interest. "Do you have access to statements?" he asked. "Household accounts, yes. The rest. Only partial visibility. I can see transfers, just not the destination details." "That's enough to start." Within 48 hours, I became a quiet observer inside my own home. I photographed tax returns, copied account summaries, forwarded transaction histories to a private encrypted email Victor set up for me. I documented dates, amounts, and patterns. I said nothing to Thomas. He assumed my silence meant surrender. That assumption bought me time. 3 days later, Victor called. His voice had changed. "Mrs. Carter, I need you to come to my office." When a forensic accountant stops using polite small talk, you pay attention. I drove downtown with my pulse steady but controlled. Fear wastes energy. Facts build leverage. Victor had documents spread across his desk when I arrived. "Does the name Northbridge Advisory Group mean anything to you?" "No, it should." "Your husband registered it 3 years ago." The air shifted. "It's structured as a consulting firm. On paper, it provides strategic advisory services. In reality, it receives large payments from vendors connected to your husband's employer." My stomach tightened. "How large?" "Over the past 18 months, approximately $230,000. That number didn't just sting. It detonated. "Kickbacks?" I asked. "Likely and worse. Funds have been transferred from joint marital assets into this entity, quietly, incrementally, designed not to trigger standard review thresholds." He leaned back. "This wasn't impulsive, this was engineered." Engineered. That word confirmed everything. Thomas hadn't woken up one day and decided he was unhappy. He had built an exit route, financially protected, legally disguised. "If you signed those divorce papers," Victor continued, "and you would be surrendering rights to assets." He deliberately moved off the books. I absorbed the information slowly. "Is it provable?" "Yes, but exposing it triggers consequences." "Criminal?" "Potentially." There it was. This wasn't just betrayal. This was fraud. And suddenly his urgency for a quick signature made perfect sense. When I returned home that evening, Thomas was unusually cheerful. "Have you reviewed the papers?" he asked casually. "I have questions," I replied. He stiffened slightly. "What kind of questions?" "Oh, simple ones," I said evenly. "Like why Northbridge Advisory Group has received over $200,000 connected to your firm." The color drained from his face. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said too quickly. "You should," I answered calmly. "You own it." Silence. Then anger replaced surprise. "You've been snooping." "Our assets," I corrected. "Not yours alone." His jaw tightened. His posture shifted. The controlled executive mask cracked just slightly. "Be careful," he warned. "You don't understand how complicated this is." "No." I understood perfectly. Complicated men rush divorces when they're afraid of exposure. That night he barely slept. I could hear him pacing in his office. He knew. He didn't know how much I knew. And that uncertainty was pressure. The next morning, instead of responding to his lawyer, I retained one of my own, a specialist in high asset disputes with experience in financial misconduct cases. I didn't file yet. Timing matters. If Thomas thought I was negotiating from weakness, he was about to learn the cost of underestimating the person who managed his life for 4 decades. Because here's what he forgot. I know his habits, his patterns, his tells. And when cornered, men like Thomas don't retreat quietly. They escalate. 2 days later, his attorney called with a revised offer, more money, temporary control of the house, faster resolution, but only if I dropped any unnecessary investigations. There it was again. Fear. And fear means leverage. But I hadn't yet decided how far I was willing to push, because if I went forward, this wouldn't just destroy a marriage, it would destroy his career. And once I made that move, there would be no going back. Thomas believed intimidation would work. He underestimated resolve. The revised offer from his attorney arrived the next morning. Larger monthly support, permission to remain in the house temporarily, a promise of a respectful transition. But one condition sat buried in the fine print. All financial complaints must be withdrawn immediately. There it was again. Desperation disguised as generosity. I didn't respond emotionally. I forwarded the document to my attorney, Rebecca Sloan. Sharp, strategic, and allergic to nonsense. Her reply was short. He's scared. Good. That afternoon we made the first official move. Rebecca filed for divorce on my behalf. Not defensive, but aggressive. Full financial disclosure demanded. Immediate forensic review requested. Temporary injunction to prevent further asset transfers. Then came the critical strike. We petitioned to freeze all joint accounts pending investigation. If Thomas wanted to move money, he'd have to explain it first. When he was served at his office, I wasn't there. But I heard about it. He came home early. Earlier than he had in months. The door slammed so hard the hallway mirror shook. "What did you do?" he demanded, storming into the kitchen. I continued slicing vegetables. "I protected my interests." "You froze the accounts." "Yes." "You filed allegations." "Yes." His composure was gone. Completely. "You have no idea what you've just triggered." I looked at him directly. "Oh, I do." For years I had watched him manage boardroom conflicts with calculated authority. Now I watched him unravel in his own kitchen. "This could ruin me," he hissed. That sentence told me everything. Not, "This will hurt us." Not, "This will complicate things." This could ruin me. Good. Then perhaps, I replied calmly, you shouldn't have built a structure designed to deceive. His hand clenched into a fist, not raised, but tight enough to reveal the strain. "You're being manipulated," he snapped. "Who's advising you?" "Professionals." His breathing grew heavier. He wasn't used to resistance, especially not from me. For decades I had supported, managed quietly, deferred publicly. He mistook stability for weakness. That mistake was collapsing in real time. The following morning, his employer initiated an internal audit. I know because one of his colleagues, a man who had attended our anniversary party years ago, discreetly contacted me. "There are questions being asked," he said carefully. "Compliance is reviewing vendor relationships." The dominoes had started falling. That evening, the situation escalated further. The doorbell rang. When I opened it, she was standing there, tall, polished, confident, mid-40s, expensive coat, diamond earrings that caught the porch light. "I'm Lauren," she said smoothly. "Thomas asked me to speak with you." Of course he did. He didn't come himself. Cowardice wears many forms. "Speak about what?" I asked calmly. "This situation. You're making it unnecessarily destructive." Unnecessarily. She stepped inside without invitation, surveying the house like an investor reviewing property. "You've grown apart," she continued. "Dragging legal accusations into this helps no one." "Are you aware," I asked quietly, "that the necklace you're wearing was likely purchased with funds diverted from marital accounts?" Her expression flickered. That's ridiculous. Is it? I watched the confidence drain slightly from her posture. You should take the settlement, she pressed. Thomas can make this comfortable for you. Comfortable. I almost admired the audacity. You're assuming this is about comfort, I replied. She didn't answer, because she didn't understand something critical. This stopped being about money the moment he tried to erase me. She left 10 minutes later, far less composed than when she arrived. That night, Thomas didn't return home. The following morning, Rebecca called. They're pushing for emergency mediation, she said. And Margaret, compliance has found irregularities, significant ones. How significant? Enough that criminal exposure is now realistic. There it was. The line had been crossed. This was no longer a marital dispute. It was potential fraud prosecution. Thomas had tried to exit quietly. Instead, he had triggered scrutiny he couldn't control. But here's the problem with cornering powerful men. They don't surrender first. They strike. And 2 days later, he made a move I hadn't anticipated. One designed not to protect his money, but to destroy my credibility completely. And when I saw what he had filed in court, I realized the war had just turned personal. 2 days later, Thomas made his move. Not financial, personal. Rebecca called me early that morning. Her tone was controlled, but sharper than usual. He's filed a response. Expected, I said. There was a pause. It includes claims against you. That got my attention. What kind of claims? Allegations of mental instability, financial incompetence, emotional volatility. He's positioning you as unfit to manage assets. I didn't react immediately because this wasn't surprising. It was strategic. If he couldn't hide the money, he would discredit the person exposing it. Classic move. Anything else? I asked. Yes, she continued. He's requesting the court appoint a financial guardian to oversee all disputed assets. I almost smiled. That was desperate. A man doesn't try to legally sideline his wife unless he's running out of options. But it was still dangerous because if the court believed even part of his narrative, it could slow everything down, bury the case in evaluations, delays, and procedural noise. And delay was exactly what he needed. Time to cover tracks, time to negotiate from confusion, time to exhaust me. You're not reacting, Rebecca said. I am, I replied, just not emotionally. Good, because we respond today. Within hours, she filed a formal rebuttal, not defensive, aggressive. We submitted documented financial patterns, transaction logs, early findings from Victor, a motion challenging his credibility based on undisclosed business interests. And then we escalated further. We formally introduced Northbridge Advisory Group into the case record. Now, it wasn't just suspicion, it was documented. By afternoon, the tone of the case shifted. Thomas wasn't just a husband requesting divorce, he was a subject under scrutiny. That evening, he showed up unannounced. No warning, no call, just standing at the door like nothing had changed. I didn't fully open it. What do you want? I asked. He looked different. Not broken, but strained. Controlled anger sitting just beneath the surface. You've taken this too far, he said quietly. No, I replied. You did. This isn't you, he continued. You don't understand what you're getting into. That line again. Always the same mistake. Assuming I didn't understand. I understand enough, I said. You moved money. You built a shell company. You tried to walk away clean. His jaw tightened. You're being fed half-truths. Then explain the full truth. Silence, because there wasn't one that worked in his favor. You could still end this, he said. Drop the claims. Take the settlement. Walk away with dignity. Dignity. That word almost made me laugh. You tried to erase me, I said calmly. That conversation's over. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and what replaced it wasn't regret, it was calculation. "You think this makes you strong," he said quietly, "but this will destroy you too." "No," I replied, "it will expose you." He held my gaze for a few seconds longer, then he left. No shouting, no threats. That was worse, because quiet men are thinking. The next morning, things moved faster. His company officially suspended him pending investigation. Internal emails were circulating, compliance teams involved, external auditors brought in. This wasn't contained anymore, and pressure creates mistakes. Victor called me that afternoon. "We've identified additional transfers," he said. "Larger ones." "How large?" "Another $120,000. Different structure. More complex routing." So he didn't stop. "No," Victor replied. He accelerated. That confirmed it. Thomas hadn't just prepared an exit. He had been actively extracting money while planning it. And now that he was under pressure, he was still trying to move assets? Risky? Desperate? Traceable. That night, I sat alone in the living room and reviewed everything. 43 years of marriage, reduced to evidence files, transaction logs, legal motions, cold, clean documentation. But underneath all of it was something simple. He thought I wouldn't fight. That assumption had cost him control. But the reality was this wasn't over, not even close. Because when men like Thomas realize they're losing financially, they change tactics. They stop playing defense, and they go after what hurts most. 2 days later, I got a message that proved exactly that. It wasn't from him, it was from her. And what she sent wasn't a threat, it was leverage. And the moment I saw it, I realized they weren't just trying to win anymore. They were trying to break me. The message came at 9:12 p.m. Unknown number. No introduction, no explanation, just a photo. It was an old one. Me, sitting in a hospital chair, exhausted, hair unbrushed, eyes hollow. My hand wrapped around Thomas's while he lay unconscious in a bed beside me. I knew exactly when it was taken. 12 years ago. After his cardiac episode. I stayed in that hospital for 6 days straight. Slept in that chair, managed doctors, insurance, medications, held everything together while he recovered. He never even knew that photo existed. But she had it. A second message followed. "You should have taken the deal." No name, didn't need one. Lauren. I didn't respond. Emotion is expensive in moments like this. And she wanted a reaction. Anger, fear, anything that could be used. Instead, I took a screenshot and sent it directly to Rebecca. Her reply came within minutes. "Good, this helps us." Most people would panic hearing that. But she was right, because this wasn't just intimidation. It was evidence. Harassment, witness interference, psychological pressure tied to an active legal case, amateur move, and amateurs make mistakes. The next morning, Rebecca filed it immediately, not as a side note, as a formal submission. Now, Lauren wasn't just the other woman. She was involved, documented, connected. That tightened the net. But pressure works both ways. By afternoon, things escalated again, this time and then through official channels. Thomas's legal team filed an emergency motion. They requested a full psychological evaluation of me. Claim I was acting irrationally, influenced by external manipulation, and making decisions not in my own best interest. There it was. Phase 2 of his strategy. If he couldn't silence me financially, he tried to discredit me mentally. It was aggressive, but also predictable. "You expected this?" Rebecca asked when we spoke. "Yes." And it's weak. Because here's the reality. You don't file psychological claims unless your financial position is unstable. It signals desperation. And courts don't ignore patterns. On one side, documented financial irregularities. On the other, sudden claims of instability from the accused party. It doesn't balance. It exposes. We'll counter it, Rebecca said. But more importantly, Raj, is we accelerate. How? We move this into a formal fraud investigation track. That was the shift. Up until now, this was still technically a divorce with financial complications. After this move, it becomes something else entirely. A legal risk for him, a criminal possibility, and that changes behavior. Because men like Thomas don't fear divorce, they fear exposure. That evening, Victor called again. We've confirmed vendor connections, he said. Direct overlap between his firm's contracts and payments into Northbridge. Enough to prove intent? Yes. That was the word I was waiting for. Intent. Not accident. Not mismanagement. Deliberate action. Which means liability. Real liability. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept properly, not because things were over, but because the direction was clear. He wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. He was reacting. And reaction creates openings. But I didn't celebrate, because this stage is where people make mistakes. They get emotional, overconfident, careless. I stayed disciplined. The next morning, everything shifted again. News doesn't stay contained when money is involved. Someone inside his firm leaked information, nothing official but enough. Questions were spreading, quiet conversations, internal pressure building, and when reputation gets involved, panic follows fast. At 11:40 a.m., my phone rang. Private number? I answered. Silence for 2 seconds, then his voice. Not controlled this time. Tight, strained. You've made your point. I didn't respond. I'm willing to renegotiate, he continued, fully. There it was. Not dominance, not control. Negotiation. Too late. You had that option before, I said calmly. You're going to destroy everything, he snapped. No, I replaced. You already did that. Silence again. Then the shift. The one I was waiting for. If this goes public, he said quietly, it won't just affect me. There it was. Not a threat. A warning. Which means there was more. Something bigger than the money? Something he hadn't revealed yet? And now, under pressure, it was starting to surface. I ended the call without answering, because whatever he was hiding, it hadn't come out yet, but it was about to. And when the full truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't just change the case. It would change everything I thought I knew about our entire marriage.
Thomas didn't call again that day. That alone told me something. Men like him don't go quiet unless they're calculating damage or preparing for impact. By afternoon, Rebecca called with a different tone than usual. Not urgency, not strategy. Focus. We've got something, she said. From Victor? No, from his firm. That got my attention. Internal audit expanded, she continued. They didn't just look at vendor payments. They started reviewing historical accounts tied to executive approvals. I stood still. How far back? 8 years? 8. This wasn't recent. This wasn't a midlife crisis mistake. This was a system. What did they find? I asked. A pause, then, Northbridge isn't the only entity. That landed heavier than anything so far. Explain. There are 2 additional consulting structures, different names, same pattern, same routing behavior. My grip tightened on the phone. How much total? Another pause. Just over $780,000. For a moment, everything went silent. Not shock, not disbelief, just clarity. This wasn't a man trying to leave his marriage. This was a man who had been quietly building an exit strategy for years, financially insulated, legally layered, and carefully hidden. And it gets worse, Rebecca added. Of course it did. One of those entities lists a secondary beneficiary. I already knew the answer before she said it. Lauren? Yes. There it was. Not just an affair, a partnership, funded, structured, protected. Everything clicked at once. The late nights, the sudden detachment, the confidence in his generous offer. He wasn't just leaving me. He was transitioning into a life he had already built, using money he had been extracting while still married. Calculated, cold, long-term. I didn't feel anger in that moment. I felt something sharper, precision. Because now the situation was clean. Clear facts, clear intent, clear exposure. What happens next? I asked. His firm is preparing to suspend him permanently, Rebecca said, and if they confirm executive misuse of funds, they'll refer it externally. Criminal? Yes. That word didn't shake me anymore. It aligned everything. But then Rebecca said something that shifted it again. Margaret, there's one more thing. I waited. He didn't just move money. What do you mean? He moved ownership. That didn't make sense at first. Of what? The lake property. My chest tightened. That's in his name. It was, she corrected. Transferred 18 months ago, into a trust structure connected to Northbridge. I didn't speak, because that one hit differently. That wasn't just money. That was memory. That house held decades of family history, summers, birthdays, quiet weekends. It wasn't an asset. It was part of my life. And he had moved it. Quietly, legally, strategically. Gone. That was the moment it stopped being controlled. Not outwardly, but internally. Because up until now, I had been operating with discipline. Now, it became personal in a different way. Not emotional. Final. Then we don't negotiate, I said. Rebecca didn't hesitate. Agreed. That was the shift. No more settlement discussions, no more back and forth offers. This moves forward fully. Exposure, recovery, accountability. That evening, I went to the house one last time, the lake house. Not to reclaim it, to look at it clearly. No illusions, no attachment clouding judgment, just reality. It was never protected, because I trusted the wrong person. That's the lesson. Not men are bad, not marriage is risky. No. Blind trust without verification creates vulnerability, and vulnerability gets exploited. I stood there for 10 minutes, then I left. No hesitation, because now I knew exactly what I was doing. And more importantly, what I wasn't doing anymore. The next morning, everything exploded. Formal notice, his termination, public, documented, irreversible. And within hours, my phone started ringing. Unknown numbers, media inquiries, legal contacts, people who suddenly had questions. Because when financial misconduct reaches that level, it doesn't stay private. And now, the story wasn't just mine anymore. It was public. But Thomas wasn't finished, not even close. Because when people yours, they don't walk away quietly. They make one last move, desperate, reckless, and dangerous. And what he did next wasn't about money anymore. It was about control, and making sure I paid for taking it from him. When people lose control, they don't negotiate. They lash out. By the time Thomas was officially terminated, the damage was already done. His firm moved fast. Public statement, internal distancing, external compliance involvement, clean separation. That's how institutions survive. Individuals don't get that luxury. My phone didn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, legal inquiries, people who suddenly cared about clarifying details. I ignored all of it. Noise doesn't win cases. Discipline does. But Thomas wasn't done. 3 days after his termination, he made his final move. It wasn't through lawyers. It wasn't through the courts. It was direct. I came home that evening and knew immediately something was wrong. The back door was unlocked. Not broken. Unlocked. That detail matters, because it meant access, not force. I stepped inside slowly. Nothing looked disturbed at first glance. Furniture in place, no obvious damage. Then I saw it. The kitchen table. A single envelope sitting in the center. No name, no stamp, just placed there. Deliberate. I didn't open it immediately. I called Rebecca first. "Don't touch anything," she said. "I'm sending someone." 20 minutes later, a private investigator and a local officer were inside the house documenting everything. Only then did we open it. Inside was a printed document, not handwritten, not emotional, structured, calculated. It was a summary. Every private financial detail of mine, accounts, small savings, even minor personal expenditures, laid out in cold, organized form. At the bottom, one line. "You're not the only one who can investigate." I didn't react outwardly, because this wasn't new information. This was intimidation. But it told me something critical. He still thought this was a game of pressure. He still believed fear would shift my decisions. That was his final mistake. "Can he do this?" I asked Rebecca. "He just did," she replied. "But it helps us more than him." Of course it did. Unauthorized entry, harassment, potential data misuse. He wasn't protecting himself anymore. He was exposing himself. Desperation removes discipline, and discipline was the only thing that had kept him hidden this long. That night, additional filings were made, not defensive, expansive. Everything now connected: financial misconduct, intimidation, unlawful access. The case wasn't growing, it was consolidating. And that's when it finally ended. Not dramatically, not emotionally, decisively. 2 weeks later, Thomas accepted a full legal settlement. Not his version, mine. Asset redistribution, financial recovery, legal acknowledgement of concealed funds, full withdrawal of claims against me. No trial, no public fight. Because you couldn't afford one. Not financially, not legally, not reputationally. Lauren disappeared from the picture completely. No statements, no contact. People like that don't stay when structure collapses. They move to the next opportunity. And Thomas? He didn't call again, didn't show up, didn't try one last conversation. Because there was nothing left to control. That's how these situations actually end. Not with closure, with silence. A few months later, I sat alone in the same kitchen where this started. Same table, different position. Not reacting, not surviving, operating. Because here's the truth most people avoid. This WhatsApp about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about refusing to be erased. 43 years of my life weren't negotiable. And the moment I stopped acting like they were, everything changed. If you take anything from this, take this. Never rely on trust alone. Verify, understand, stay aware. Because the people closest to you have the most access. And access, without accountability, creates risk. I didn't lose everything. I almost did. That's the difference. And most people don't realize it until it's too late. But the real question isn't what I recovered. It's how many people are sitting exactly where I was right now, trusting someone who's already planning their exit. 3 months after everything ended, something strange happened. Nothing. No calls, no updates, no drama, just silence. At first it felt unnatural. After weeks of legal pressure, tension, and constant movement, silence almost feels like something is missing. But that's where most people get it wrong. They think the story ends when the conflict ends. It doesn't. That's where the real shift happens. I rebuilt slowly, not emotionally, that comes later, structurally. I reviewed every account in my name, every legal document, every ownership detail. Things I should have verified years ago. I didn't rush. Speed creates mistakes, and I wasn't repeating old ones. People started asking questions. How did you stay calm? You didn't panic? Weren't you scared? Of course I was, but fear without action is useless, and panic is exactly what the other side depends on. That's the real lesson here. Not marriage, not betrayal. Control. If you lose control of information, you lose control of outcomes. Simple. Thomas didn't lose because I was stronger. He lost because I became aware. There's a difference. Strength reacts. Awareness prevents. And most people live blind inside their own lives. They trust blindly, ignore patterns, avoid uncomfortable questions. Until one day everything shifts and they're forced to react from a weak position. That's where I was heading, until I stopped. That's the moment everything changed. Now here's the part no one talks about. I didn't just recover financially, I changed how I operate completely. No blind trust, no assumptions. Everything verified, everything understood. Because once you've seen how easily control can be taken from you, you don't go back to being careless. And here's the uncomfortable truth you need to hear. Most people watching this right now are exactly where I was. Comfortable, certain, unaware. And that's the most dangerous position you can be in. Because problems don't start loudly, they build quietly, just like mine did. So the real question isn't whether this could happen to you, it's whether you'd even see it coming before it's too late.